see here, right here, you got Bereshit. You see the bet right there, and it's got a vocal sheva, and the vocal sheva and the bet makes a what's called an inseparable preposition. There are two types of prepositions in Hebrew. There's the inseparable preposition, the makia preposition, and the independent preposition. Independent prepositions are just like our regular prepositions that we see in English. We have a separate word that's a preposition. A makia preposition is a preposition that is separated from the word by a hyphen, known as a makia. And a inseparable preposition is certain letters like bet and lamed that are combined to the word, inflected to the word. That's why they're called inseparable prepositions, and they always have a particular prepositional nuance. Like in the case of bet, it's in, with, by. Those are the meanings of the word bet, the letter bet, when it's added to a word as an inseparable preposition. And so this would, and Reshith is the Hebrew word for beginning. This is Reshith right here. And once you pass the bet right here, you got Reshith. Hello, my name is Brian Bowen, and you're watching Apologetics 101. All right, today I am going to be doing a presentation on the traditional translation versus the dependent clause translation. Now, I've been wanting to do this for a while, and I've got it with my Genesis series, just titled the Genesis series. It's basically my YouTube commentary series on Genesis chapters 1 through 11. I do an exegetical, in-depth exegetical treatise of a particular chapter or chapters of Genesis, going from chapters 1 through 11, because that's primarily what I'm doing. That's usually the chapters that end up getting attacked. And so I'm doing that, and whenever I do a chapter or chapters, I then go back and do topological matters that may be relevant to those particular sections. And we're still stuck on chapter 1. As I mentioned before, this series is going to take a while. I anticipate it's going to go all the way up until next year, possibly into next year, maybe even middle of next year. I don't know. But it's going to be a while, and I'm going to do some other things too. I'm fixing to do a debate review, I think, of a debate that Michael Jones of Inspiring Philosophy, who's a theistic evolutionist, had with Dr. Marcus Ross, who's a young Earth creationist, on Capturing Christianity. I'm fixing to do that debate review that I've been wanting to do for a while. But first, I wanted to go ahead and put out another part to my series, because I've been studying a lot on the traditional translation versus the dependent clause translation. There is a translation that a lot of theistic evolutionists favor. It's called the dependent clause translation. A dependent clause essentially is when you have additional information that needs to supplement the clause. The clause cannot stand on its own. It has to have other words, more to the context, more to the information to stand on its own. There are clauses that can stand on its own independently, like John 1:1, for example. In the beginning was the Word. That could actually stand on its own. That's the first clause of the first verse of the Gospel of John. But then you have the second clause also. He does provide more information, but each clause is independent from the other clauses. They could stand on their own. Like in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. Even though there's a conjunction there, you could tell that the clause could stand on its own. And each one's like that. And the Word was God, at the end. And that's what's called an independent clause, which means that the clause can stand on its own. And of course, traditionally and pretty much universally throughout the church, at least until the Middle Ages, there was a couple of Jews in the Middle Ages that tried to translate it as a dependent clause. But for the most part, the church has always understood this as an independent clause and the first act of creation. And even today, most Hebrew scholars, most Old Testament scholars, almost all Bible translations, with the exception of a few, and most of them are going to be centered in Catholic versions or Jewish versions. But almost all the other Bible translations especially in the Protestant tradition, translates this as the traditional, what's called the traditional translation. It basically translates it as an independent clause, and Bereshit, which means in the beginning, as a independent or a absolute state. In Hebrew, there are two states to the words. There's an absolute state and there's a construct state. The absolute state is basically the lexical form of the word. The construct state is whenever the word requires other words to complete it, to add more information to it. And so what a lot of people do that are theistic evolutionists that want to believe in what's called the dependent clause translation, they are trying to say that the Bereshit should be understood as a construct word, as well as they think it should be like indefinite. It lacks the definite article, and so they think it should be translated as a constructive. In the constructive state. So they say it's in the constructive state, and they think it's a relative restrictive clause, essentially. Now, is that the case? No. We're going to find out that. We're going to go straight to the Hebrew, and we're going to talk more about that when we get to the Hebrew, because we're going to discuss the reasons why Genesis 1:1 should be translated as an independent clause, and Bereshit should be understood as in the absolute state, and that it should be understood as definite, even though the definite article isn't there. We're going to talk more about that as we go forward. I'm going to kind of slow it down. I know when I did my original exegetical commentary, I used Logos, and I am going to be using Logos today. I thought about doing it in the form of PowerPoint, and I'd already started working on that. I might still do that. Don't know. I'm trying to get some Hebrew scholars on here to have a discussion with me about the dependent clause translation, if I can get a hold of it. I want to try to get Walter Kaiser on here. He's an older creationist, but he is a Hebrew scholar, and he is very much against the dependent clause translation. So, and he doesn't agree with the gap theory and so forth. So I would like to try to get him on here and have a discussion with him, not a debate, but just like an interview concerning the Hebrew and the grammar and the syntax of Genesis 1:1 specifically, and to see how what kind of issues he might be able to draw out of that. I haven't got that confirmation yet. I sent him an email, and I'm waiting for him to respond back. I'm hoping he does, but we'll see. We'll see where that goes. We got my interviews. I just have to play it by ear. Sometimes they accept, sometimes they don't. So I asked Dr. Marcus Ross to help me with the debate review, because I want to do a debate review on that debate that they did, and I'm still going to do that. I'm probably fixing to do that soon after I make this video. Or Dr. Marcus Ross got back to me in email finally, and when he did get back to me, he told me that, and I don't say finally in a bad way, I didn't mean to make it sound like it was negative, but he does finally get back to me, and he's real busy right now, and he said he's got some pre-commitments, some things that he had already obligated himself to do, and so he's like real busy right now, and he said he'd have to decline my offer. But he was very graceful about it. You know, he wasn't mean or disrespectful or anything. So I think that I mean it happens. It's fine. I'm kind of disappointed. I would have liked him on here. He made some very good responses in that debate. But I know enough about the issues that I can address it and be able to deal with, you know, how he responded and understand where everybody was coming from and so forth. So it'd be okay. But any given case, sometimes they come on there, sometimes they don't. Sometimes I can get hold of them, sometimes they don't. I would like to get a hold of Dr. Stephen Boyd, but I can't even find him. He's retired, so I don't know where he is. Walter Kaiser actually has a website, and so I'm hoping that he'll get my email and be able to get back with me. So I might do some other stuff on it as well. So this does not necessarily have to be the end of the topic on it doesn't have to be the end of the dependent clause translation, but in the traditional translation versus the independent or dependent clause translation. But in any given case, I do want to show that, and so we're gonna use logos again, like we did that one time when we did the exegetical commentary, because I want to be able to sit there and show you directly from the Hebrew. That's why I decided not to go with the presentation, because presentation seems so far away. Like, okay, I'm not getting the point here. It seems to be easier and better if I just take you directly to the Hebrew and even the Greek, because we're going to go into the Septuagint as well, because the Septuagint actually supports the natural translation of Genesis 1:1 from the Hebrew in the Codex, or the Leningrad Codex. All right. In any given case, without further ado, let's dive into this. All right. Hello again. All right. Okay, we're now looking at the Hebrew here. All right. This is the Hebrew of Genesis 1:1. Bereshit, Bara, Elohim, Eighth, Hashamayim, La'eth, and Haaretz. All right. Here we start with Bereshit. That is what the word that is translated as in the beginning. You see it has an inseparable preposition here. You have by here like in, which is here. Let me sync these. You see here, right here, you got Bereshit. You see the bet right there, and it's got a vocal sheva, and the vocal sheva and the bet makes a what's called an inseparable preposition. There are two types of prepositions in Hebrew. There's the inseparable preposition, the makia preposition, and the independent preposition. Independent prepositions are just like our regular prepositions that we see in English. We have a separate word that's a preposition. A makia preposition is a preposition that is separated from the word by a hyphen, known as a makia. And a inseparable preposition is certain letters like bet and lamed that are combined to the word, inflected to the word. That's why they're called inseparable prepositions, and they always have a particular prepositional nuance. Like in the case of bet, it's in, with, by. Those are the meanings of the word bet, the letter bet, when it's added to a word as an inseparable preposition. And so this would, and Reshith is the Hebrew word for beginning. This is Reshith right here. And once you pass the bet right here, you got Reshith. All right, this right here has Reshith, and it translates as beginning in Hebrew. Now we're going to get a little bit more into the definite article. I'm going to go through the other words first, but that's one of the big deals that some people that have this particular position make on Bereshit. All right, then you got bara. That's the Hebrew word for create. It's a what's called a finite verb, which means it's always in the absolute state. A finite verb is in the absolute state, and we're going to get a little bit more into talking about bara here in a second, because a lot of people think that, or the ones that think that the dependent clause, this is a dependent clause, thinks that Bereshit is in construct with bara, and that's not possible in a construct chain, but we'll get to that in a second. All right, then you have Elohim. That's the name for God. Proper nouns, which is what a name or title is always a proper noun. It's always proper noun. A proper noun is always absolute state. Okay, it's always an absolute state, and so it's always definite and it's always absolute. So this is automatically definite, automatically absolute. All right, then you got eighth, which is actually a grammatic. It's actually added for grammatical purposes, so it actually is untranslated. This is what's called a direct object maker. It makes something a direct object. In this case, Hashamayim. Okay, Hashamayim is translated as the heavens or the heaven. Some translations will translate as the heavens, or some will translate as the heaven. It could probably be translated either one, because Shamayim is actually in the dual form, which the heavens is always in the dual form for some reason. So it could be translated as heaven or heavens, but I think heavens is probably more proper because it is likely the context indicates it's talking about the universe. They didn't actually have a word for universe, so the Hebrews often use heavens and heaven, the heaven and earth, or the heavens and earth to indicate everything in creation. Okay, again, it's direct object of the sentence, right? It's one of the direct. There's actually two direct objects of this of Genesis 1:1. And hash on my him is the first one. This makes the direct object. Here's another direct object maker, but this one's got the conjunction vav in it. The vav is actually a conjunction. Well, it's a letter in Hebrew, but it's used as a conjunction. And then when it's inflected to a word, it's got the vocal sheva there. You do this right here. Of course, you pronounce all of it, but the vav actually does translate. The eighth doesn't translate because it's added for grammatical purposes to make it something a direct object. So this is pronounced va'eth, and next direct object is haaretz. And haaretz is well, literally it translates as land because the Hebrews didn't have a word that meant earth because the word earth actually wasn't really invented yet, but it actually does come from haaretz. Along with other words, but it actually does come from that. But this right here means land in Hebrew, but I think it's understood as all land, like the whole physical earth is how it's being understood here. And that's why almost all translators, except for the ones that are really trying to go really dynamic with it, typically translate this as earth. And this is the second definite or the second direct object. We also know something else. Hash on my ham and haaretz have definite article in it. This hey right here is what's called a definite article. Here you see haaretz. It's this because the this actually lengthens out the komats because there's another komats there, and there's a guttural right here. It's called a guttural. I'm not gonna get into all that. I mean, you'd have to study Hebrew to understand all that. And then right here is a patok. That's the short vowel, and this right here, so a little dot right there with the shin, that's called a dagesh patay. It doubles the consonant sound. So this right here would translate or pronounce as hash on my him, and it translates as the heavens. So and it's like I said, the heavens and the earth. Okay. All right. Now, with that out of the way, where's the issues lie? Well, those who support the dependent clause translations believe that Bereshit should be understood as a construct noun. And Genesis 1:1 should be understood as what's called a relative restrictive clause. Essentially, without getting too into the weeds here, essentially they are saying that it requires more information to supplement it ultimately. Now let's start with Bereshit. Why do they think that Bereshit should be understood as a construct noun? Well, because there's no definite article. Well, as we see, there's a definite article here, there's a definite article here, and even though Elohim doesn't have a definite article, you wouldn't expect a definite article on a proper noun because proper nouns are always definite and absolute. And Bara, it's absolute. But they're saying that this should be translated as a construct because if it was being understood as definite, then there would be a komats right there with the bet. And I would say no, that would not be the case because the bet is an inseparable preposition and it's supposed to have the vowel pointer here, the vocal sheva. If this was supposed to be a komets, it would actually be on Bereshit, not on the bet. And this would be lengthened to a komats if that was the case. And it would be like Rashith instead of Bereshit. But that's not it. And of course, if this is intended to be that way, then this would actually lengthen to a vocal sheva. So you got the bet, and you got the vocal sheva here, but you have two vocal shevas. The rule of sheva in Hebrew is that you don't have two. Can't have two shevas side by side, so this would actually shorten the sound right here in the inseparable preposition to an herek, which looks like a little dot here, and so it would be bir ra or bir ra sheep if that was the case. Now obviously, and of course, if it has a definite article in front of it, it'd be like ha but sheep, or it could be ha. I mean, they could be asking maybe the commands could be under the definite article, possibly. Now, of course, the fact that there's no definite article here doesn't make it indefinite anyhow. Okay. By the way, just for a point of reference, I don't put all my cards on the vowel pointers because I can go any way and it can open all kinds of doors in on either party. And I think that the main issues are going to lie in the syntax and the grammar, and so that's why I usually focus on. Okay, the fact that it doesn't have a definite article does not make it indefinite. All right, we're going to get into that a little bit more here in a little bit because we're going to talk about Isaiah 46:10, and you'll know the relevance of that in here in a little bit. But right now we have Bereshit. It has no definite article. But one of the things that makes something definite is if the context supports that it's definite, such as if other words in the context indicate a definality. You got definite direct object makers, two direct objects, both of which have definite articles on them. You got Elohim, which is always in the definite, and you got an absolute state here. Bara is in the absolute state because it's a finite verb. And so this right here is understood as definite, and it's understood as an absolute state here. And here a little bit, I'll show you why that is, because we're going to go back to 46:10. But before we do, I want to sit there and talk to you about Genesis 2:4, because sometimes people will say, well, Genesis 2:4, that supports our position because it's just like Genesis 1:1. I beg you differ on that. Let's check that out. Okay, we're here. Okay, you see this? See right here? Okay, these are the generations. That's the Toledo. And this right here, this word right here is ha. Let me see if you can find it. Right here. All right. This is Bahibaram. Bahibaram. You gotta say that 10 times fast. Bahibaram. All right. Now this right here, you can see is actually not a finite verb like what you see in Bara. It means when God created, and the ESV translates it as such. You see the inseparable preposition in front. This right here is in construct state, which is not the same as nowhere close actually in Bereshit. And then you see here the word it's in construct two, namely yom, which is it's like a temple phrase, but it has the inseparable preposition bet in front of it, and then it is modified by the construct state. So you got the construct state here, and it's in construct two bayom. All right, this is why this is in translates as when you see right here where it is when they were created in the day of that Jehovah. When, in other words, it translates as when God in the day when God created the heavens and the earth is how it would translate. So so there's lots of differences here. One thing, if you notice this has a suffix to it. Okay. There's a reason for that. That's interesting because if you go back to Genesis 1:1, you notice there is no suffix here. There's Bereshit. This you're allowed to have a prefix on a absolute state, but you cannot, or absolute noun, but you cannot have a suffix on it. Suffix cannot be on an absolute word in Hebrew. Now in a construct state, you can have a suffix on it. Most of the time they do have suffixes on them. They don't always, but I mean they can. But this one doesn't. And if you go back over here, we're now seeing that this word right here, it has a suffix on it, right? In fact, it's a plural suffix actually, but it's a suffix, which they can have. It has a prefix and a suffix, and it doesn't use the word bra. In fact, the word bra is actually not used in Genesis 2:4 at all. It has the word yom, but it's connected with an inseparable preposition, which is unlike yom in Genesis 1. And you follow it up here with asa, which is interesting because asa is not the word that's used for create. Bra is used for create, but here they use asa. Now this is a synonym for bara. It could be used synonymously with it, and it usually is. I mean, in Genesis 1:25, 26 and 27, we see them. When it talks about man being created in the image of God, asa and bara is used interchangeably, and it actually usually is in the Old Testament. But this is interesting because bara is not actually used here. And so this is very different than what we see in Genesis 1:1. So this is not the same as Genesis 2:4. Genesis 2:4 should be translated as a dependent clause. Here, it should not be translated as a dependent clause. And so the ESV is right in translating that as a dependent clause. All right. Now, so here's what I'm saying. Basically, this is an absolute state. This is an absolute state. All right. Okay. Now, here's the deal with bra. Bra is a verb, not a noun. In order for something to be in construct, okay, there's in Hebrew, they don't have an actual word that means of. They got some prepositions that come close and that sort of thing, and could be translated that way. In certain words, it could be translated that way if it's in construct state, but they don't have an actual word that means of the way we do in English. And so what ends up happening is that they end up having what's called a construct chain. Right? A construct chain is basically a link of words combining construct words with an absolute noun. Okay? Construct, like you might have, most construct chains are going to consist of like two words, the construct word and the absolute word, absolute noun, construct noun and absolute noun. But you could have more than two. You can have more than one construct noun. You cannot have more than one absolute noun. You can only have one absolute noun, and that absolute noun always appears at the end of the chain, like a caboose of an actual chain. And so, or actual train. You can't interrupt that chain either, by the way. You can't break the links. Construct to another construct word, which can then go to another construct word, which then can go to absolute state, or it could be construct word and then absolute noun, and it could do that. And in Hebrew, the absolute or but you can't have a word, a finite verb, and then an absolute noun. Okay, because you can't place a word in construct to a finite verb. Okay, for one thing, it's a verb, not a noun. It has to be a noun. Now, certain verbs in Hebrew can act as nouns, just like they can in English and so forth. Malayer can be translated as king or a king, but it can also be translated as to rule. So it could be translated either way. So some nouns can be translated into, or some verbs can be understood as nouns or in substitution of nouns. Finite verbs are not one of them. Finite verbs are always in absolute state. They're always definite. They are literally the lexical meaning of that particular verb. Now you can have a different form of that verb, and that could be used. Yeah. But you can't use the finite verb. And on top of that, it is cow perfect. Bra is cow perfect. And so that means that it can relate to past, present, and future. Whereas asa is, but this one right here is cow perfect. So it can refer to a past event. In this case, creation. And so, but you cannot have Bereshit construct to Bara. And you can't skip over Bara to get to Elohim because it's an absolute state. It's a noun and it's definite. But you cannot skip over that to that because it would break the chain. And as my Hebrew textbook, I got it somewhere around here. You cannot have Bereshit construct to Bara, and you can't break the chain to Elohim, which is absolute. And even if you could do that, like if you removed Bara and so forth, then the Elohim would be an absolute noun, and it's what's called a proper noun, and proper nouns in Hebrew are always absolute and they're always definite. And here's the gist. Here's something that you need to know. The reason that construct nouns don't have the definite article in them, that's one of the things that Homestead and others who support this position will often point out, that construct nouns don't have definite article, which is true, they don't. But the reason that they don't have the definite article in them is because the absolute noun is what determines a construct change, whether it is absolute or not, or whether it's definite or not. And this is determined by whether the definite article is present or not in the absolute noun. Now, if you could take away Bara, try to replace Bara with Elohim, well, it would still be definite because Elohim is a proper noun, which means in Hebrew, it is always definite. That's why you don't have to prefix a definite article to it because it's always definite. So it would still make this definite regardless whether you try to remove Bara or not. Interesting. Let's go to the Septuagint here. Okay, this is the Septuagint. Okay, this is the Greek translation of Genesis 1:1. The earliest manuscript that we have on the Septuagint is 3rd century AD. We pretty much know what the Septuagint held. I mean, the New Testament apostles constantly cited from it. John 1:1 most likely alluded to it, and we'll get into that in a second. But so we know what the Septuagint looked like in the 1st century. We have a very good idea of that. And if you look at here, this follows along very closely. Well, if you look over here, okay, it follows very closely to the Hebrew. Okay, look over here. Yeah, here, this is the preposition for in, right here. Okay, and then you got here arche, which by the way is beginning in Hebrew or Greek, and you notice there's no definite article. Okay, there's no definite article attached to this. So you got in arche, epoiesin, that's the Greek word for create, hatheos, God, ton, huranon, that is heaven or heavens. Actually, it's heavens. It could translate. It's accusative. I don't think it's plural. It might be plural, but translates to heaven or the heavens. Ka, tain, gain, and the earth. Okay, this is the earth in Greek. All right, so you got in the beginning, epoiesin, hatheos, God created, tanhuranon, the heavens, ka, which is the conjunction in Greek with and. This is a definite article, obtain, gain, the earth. So it follows the exact same pattern here. Okay, you got Bereshit in the beginning, Elohim, Bara, and then you got eighth and Hashamayim. You know, you got the eighth. Let's go back to my Hebrew. Yep, right here. So you got this. You have eighth right here, Haaretz, and then you got and the earth was formless and void. Here in verse 2. By the way, another thing that's interesting is, all right, you got in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Okay, same as here. Okay, and the earth was without form and void. Notice this is verse 2, and the earth was without form and void. Now look here on verse 2, you see a Vowel here, right? The Vowel, it has a vocal sheva underneath. And this right here is a conjunction, and it's a particular type of conjunction because there's like two different kinds of conjunctions in Hebrew. There's the vowel consecutive, and then there's vowel disjunctive. This is a vowel disjunctive because it's attached to a non-verb. If it's attached to a verb, then it's considered to be a vowel consecutive. The vowel consecutives don't start until verse 3. You see vowel consecutive right here, and it starts from that point on. That's actually and God said. And so that starts the vowel consecutives. In verse 2, at the beginning is a vowel disjunctive. This is interesting because this would actually make verse 2 a dependent clause itself. Now also look at the fact that it's got like multiple clauses in verse 2. Now, the people that hold this position, there's different views. Some hold that they think verse 3 is the first act of creation, but then they have to go through all three clauses to argue this. But in the case of most people who hold this position, it's not a majority position, but there are many scholars within this particular position, the theistic evolutionists, would say that 2a is the first act of creation, but it starts off with the vowel disjunctive, and on top of that, you've got the other two clauses. They're just hanging there. They're dependent clauses. I mean, what are they dependent to? I guess maybe verse 3. I don't know what they would argue on that, but they would have to get through three different clauses, and so it always in the translation of the dependent clause translation, the translation always sounds forced. It sounds like it's an unnatural translation. Dr. Joshua Wilson wrote a couple of peer-reviewed journal articles in Answers Research Journal, in which case in one particular thing, I think he says this on Answers in Genesis actually, but he says it's awkward in the Hebrew. Stanhope, I got his book right here, Ben Stanhope. He's a theistic evolutionist that takes this position as well, and he actually admits twice actually that this is, using his word, cumbersome from the Hebrew in response to Josh Wilson's statement about it being difficult. And the word cumbersome is just a fancy word that just means difficult or weighty. Now, Ben Stanhope goes further by trying to say, well, he thinks that just proves that it's that way anyhow, because he thinks that they're imitating ancient Near Eastern literature, which actually does two things. One, that's a circular argument. So he's committing a circular argument when he argues that, because that's ultimately what he's trying to do, which brings me to the second thing. He's trying to it kind of exposes his bias, why he really thinks that it's not because it naturally flows from the Hebrew. In reality, it doesn't flow naturally from the Hebrew. It is a forced translation, and it sounds forced whenever it is translated that way. The most natural reading of the text, like Dr. Joshua Wilson said, and lots of other people have said this as well, and it naturally flows from the translation to translate it as an independent clause Bereshit should be translated in the absolute state. Now, what about this thing with Bereshit needing to have a definite article? Is that true? It's true that construct states don't have a definite article, and the reason for that is because the absolute or the absolute noun is supposed to determine the definality of the construct chain. That's why they construct the word. It doesn't mean that every time a construct word is used, it's automatically indefinite, because construct nouns can actually be definite and be in construct. But what determines it as definite or indefinite is the absolute noun. And so, and of course, that doesn't happen here because you'd have to put it in construct with Bara, which is not even a noun, it's a verb. It's a finite verb. And so this cannot be used as a noun. All right, so that becomes kind of problematic to begin with. But let's turn our attention to Isaiah. Isaiah 46:10. All right, awesome. Okay, you see here, declaring the end from the beginning. From the beginning is the Hebrew word Bereshit, which is right here. And you notice it's in the exact same form. The mem here in the front of the Hebrew word, this right here, Reshit, uses the same Hebrew word beginning. Okay, this is used as an acting type of acting as a inseparable preposition. Mem is not usually used as an inseparable preposition. You know, it's bet, lamad, lamed, kaf. Those are used as inseparable prepositions. The mem, along with the vav, is usually used as a makia preposition with the dash. But sometimes they replace that dash and it'll be just the mem and the vav. And sometimes they'll even take out the vav. And when that happens, usually this will change to a degesh forte right here at the first of the letter. But Reshith starts out with a row, and row cannot be, or resh, not row. I'm thinking Greek. But resh cannot take a degesh forte. It's not exactly a guttural, but it acts like a guttural. So that means everything that's true or false with a guttural is also true or false with the letter resh. And so gutturals can't take degesh fortes or any degesh point. It won't take it. And so what happens is, instead, this right here is lengthened from a hirak, because it usually has a hirak vowel pointer underneath, and which looks like a dot, and it lengthens it to these two dots, which is called a taser. And so this is actually translated like the long sound of an E, but the E makes kind of a long A sound. I guess the best example of that would be like obey, the E in obey, or the E in eBay. That would be examples of that. But anyway, it's pronounced may, Reshith, like that. And so this acts as a preposition. So it's in the same form that we see the Bereshith in. But look, it has no definite article. Why doesn't it have a definite article? And here's the interesting thing. This is actually in absolute state. This is considered absolute. That's why you don't translate that as of the beginning. You translate that as from the beginning. From the beginning. From the beginning. And it's the beginning. Because it's definite. It's in absolute state. Okay? He declares, God said, I declare the end from the beginning. May Reshith. Same form as that. Basically, what this is a bit of cherry picking. It assumes that anytime a word is without a definite article, that means that it must be translated as a construct noun, but that's not true because there are situations where there is no definite article. Now, what is that situation? Well, this right here is what's called a temporal phrases. Temporal phrases often did not have a definite article. Instead, their definality was based on the context of the word, which usually that's one of the ways in which something can be determined as definite. That's why I kept pointing out all the different ways to understand that it is considered definite in the sentence. And of course, you got declaring the end from the beginning. For I am God. It's up here in verse 9. Verse 10 says, for I am God. There is none like me. And then it's declaring the end from the beginning. Yep. Declaring the end from the beginning. Or the, yeah, something like that. But anyway, May with sheep. And that's what that means. It means from the beginning. It's in absolute state. It does not have a definite article in it. And the reason is because it is a temporal phrase. And so is Bereshit. Bereshit is also a temporal phrase, which means it always gets its definality from the context, and it usually doesn't have a definite article in it. And so these can stand in absolute state. And also understand something. Absolute state means that it stands alone. It does not require other words to complete its information. Okay, so it's not in construct to any other word. It stands alone as itself. And so that means that, let's go back to it. All right, again, Bereshit, Bara, Elohim, Eighth, Hashemayim, Vaith, Haaretz. Bereshit is in an absolute state. And again, with the Septuagint, there's no way to translate this from the Greek into a dependent clause. Even if the door was open, even a crack in the Hebrew, it's not open at all in Genesis 1:1 from the Septuagint, which is the Greek version or the translation which the apostles had used. And John 1:1 likely is alluding back to the Septuagint. Let me go to that real quick. All right. All right. Here we are in Greek for the New Testament. And this is John 1:1. And this actually alludes to Genesis 1:1. And you notice the definite article is in there. And this is actually alluding to Genesis 1:1 out of the Septuagint. Again, look, an arche ein halagos, ka ha lagos ein proston theon, ka theos ein halagos. In the beginning was the word, used the imperfect form of Amy, was the word, that's right here, and conjunction here, ha lagos, the word was with God, means face-to-face relationship here. Ka theos ein halagos is the predicate nominative, and here's the Greek word for word, and this is the definite article right here. And so this in Greek, the lack of a definite article would make something indefinite. Because the definite article had lots of functionality. In addition to that, in order to make something a dependent clause, it actually has to have a preposition. Where in Hebrew, you wouldn't necessarily have to have a preposition, you just need it to be in construct form, which is the whole argument that the people who support the dependent clause tries to make. But here in the Greek, you cannot make that argument. Now, keep in mind, this is alluding to the Septuagint version of Genesis 1:1, and you notice anarche, same form, goes in the Septuagint. Go back over here to the Septuagint, and arche, see, follows along right there. And arche, right? You got eposen, hatheos, ton, huadon, ka, tain, gain. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Here, it follows along with it. There's no definite article. And so you can see that in the Greek, you wouldn't be able to translate it that way. I mean, it'd be impossible from the Greek as a result. And so the Septuagint supports the traditional translation as it's translated in the Leningrad Codex and the Mosaic text, the MT. So, okay, this is what I'm concluding. All right. The traditional translation follows naturally from the Greek or from the Hebrew grammar. Okay. From the Hebrew grammar and the syntax and the context, this fits perfectly with it. It flows from it. I'm not arguing that the people who takes this position don't know Greek or Hebrew. Some of them do. And some of them, like Stanhope, are willing to admit, yeah, it's difficult to translate it this way. And it is. I mean, it is difficult to translate it this way because to translate it to a dependent clause because it is awkward in the Hebrew to translate it that way. It's like you're forcing the translation to work when it clearly doesn't. All right. Bereshit is a temporal phrase, so it does not require a definite article on it to make it. Well, to start with, the definite article, and it does not necessarily have to have a definite article to make it definite. The context can actually make it definite, and we see all these definite words that are clearly meant. We got the Haaretz, the Hashemayim, you got the direct object makers, you got the Elohim, you got the Bara and absolute state, and definite, and so yeah, this doesn't require it to have a definite article in the first place, but it's also a temporal phrase. And because it's a temporal phrase, temporal phrases typically didn't have definite articles on them because they always get their definality from the context. And temporal phrases like Bereshit in Isaiah 46:10 can actually be an absolute state and stand on their own. And this is clearly an absolute state. This is clearly independent clause. The translation trying to translate it as when God created the heavens and earth in order to avoid Genesis 1:1 as an absolute beginning point for all creation fails miserably. I just don't see how you'd be able to make this type of argument work from the grammar and the syntax. In all honesty, I think that the dependent clause translation is indefensible from the Hebrew grammar and syntax. That's just my opinion, but it's always going to come out sounding forced and unnatural. It's never going to sound like the most natural reading of the text. The arguments that are used to support the dependent clause translations are very weak, cherry picking type arguments. It doesn't consider the fact that it does not, just because it doesn't have a definite article, doesn't automatically make something construct or relative clauses. In fact, they actually, the Jews were very familiar with relative restrictive clauses. These type of clauses they were very aware of, and yet they translated it this way, and it's also translated that way in the Septuagint as well. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And so there's just no doubt that this is definitely translated as an independent clause. And so I would consider the dependent clause translation. If you take that position, I would consider this a mistranslation of Genesis 1:1. It's not a proper translation of the text. I would actually put it, I know some people might argue against this, but I would put it so high as a mistranslation that I would put it on par with the Jehovah Witnesses mistranslation of Genesis 1 or of John 1:1. I would put it that high because it's that botched up, where the Jehovah Witnesses think that lack of a definite article automatically means that it should be translated as a God rather than, the God, or, because it lacks a definite article. They don't understand what a predicate nominative is and that sort of thing. And so I would put it on par with that. I would put it even with that. It's that botched up a translation. And I do also consider this a heretical translation. Now, let me explain why, because a lot of people might get all bent out of shape. I'm not saying you're not a Christian if you take the translation. So don't strawman me and assume that I'm saying that. That's not what I'm saying. But I do consider this a heretical translation. Why do I dependent clause translation as a heretical translation, not the Hebrew or the independent clause? The reason I consider this a heretical translation is because ultimately, and even the people who take this position admit this, they're trying to deny creatio ex nihilo. That's Latin for creation out of nothing. The biblical basis for creatio ex nihilo is Genesis 1:1, because it shows the absolute beginning point of all creation and all matter, time, and energy. But they want to put this on par with ancient Near Eastern literature. And so they do this by trying to argue that this is not, that God did not create from nothingness, but whether he created from pre-existing matter, just like they did in ancient Near Eastern literatures and other pagan documents and that sort of thing. But that's not the case. There's a lot of anti-polemics in the Genesis 1, enough to make you realize that they're very much against this type of writing anyhow. But Genesis 1:1 is a scream in the opposite direction. It's not saying that it's not God creating from pre-existing matter the way gods in the ancient Near Eastern world did, but whether it's God creating from absolute nothingness. There's not anything at all. There's no matter. There's no time. There's no space. There was no universe before there's a universe, as me and Dr. Jason Lau discussed the last time. I had a video, and when I did my video on the origin of the universe, and we talked about this as well. We mean absolutely nothing was here. There was no pre-existing matter to work off of, the way the theistic evolutionists often try to argue. I affirm absolutely creatio ex nihilo, and I think Genesis 1:1 affirms creatio ex nihilo, and there is no way to get around that. None. You can try to argue for the dependent clause translation, but it's always going to come down to it sounding like a forced translation that is hermeneutically unsound. It's exegetically unsound. You cannot make it work. It's always going to sound forced and unnatural. You got 3 clauses in verse 2 to get through. You got the Vowel disjunctive. You got trying to place Bereshit in construct with Bara. I mean, you got all of these kinds of issues that come up as a result. And so you have to go through like 10 different hermeneutical hoops just to try to get around them. And at the end of the day, it's still going to sound like something that Moses never even wrote. That's not what Moses was talking about. And it's going to sound so unnatural. You will know that Moses did not intend that meaning at all. Even if you could try to force that meaning out of it, even try to squeeze it and believe that meaning out of it, it will not come out of that text. Because at the end of the day, this is an independent clause that stands by itself. Bereshit is an absolute state, so it stands by itself, and there's just no way of getting around that, no matter how hard you try. And I'm sure that they will. I'm sure there's going to be people that's going to respond to this video, and I plan on making other, possibly other videos. I'm in the work to see if I can do that. If not, I'll move on from this topic, and we'll discuss some other stuff before leaving chapter 1. I would love to be able to have another interview with Dr. Jason Lau on Distant Starlight. We will have that eventually, but right now his schedule is pretty full, and so we're having to wait a few months before we get around to that. But we will eventually get around to it. It's just a matter of time. I might have to continue on into chapter 2 and so forth, and just come back to chapter, or at least come back to the topic matter of Distant Starlight. But I would love to have that discussion with Dr. Jason Lau. I take his particular position on the ASC model, and so I don't think there's anyone better for me to have a conversation with about Dr. Jason Lau's model than Dr. Jason Lau. And so I'm willing to wait for the right time. I don't want to do a video without him on that, because he is the best person that I can even think of to can defend that model. And I've seen him defend it before. It's awesome. But that will be for a later video later on down the road. All right. Well, I'm gonna cue the closing, and we'll and I'll see you in a minute. Well, that's it for today. I just want to be able to end with this, I guess. When it comes to Genesis 1:1, there's no doubt that the orthodox teaching of creatio ex nihilo, creation out of nothing, is absolutely true and has a biblical basis. There's no doubt that Genesis is teaching that God did not create from pre-existing matter like the pagan gods did, but rather created from absolute nothing, created from absolute nothingness. All young Earth creationists affirm this. Most older Earth creationists affirm this. It is a Christian doctrine. It is a orthodox Christian doctrine. I'm not saying it's necessarily wrong to deviate from orthodox, but I'm just saying that it is an orthodox teaching. And this is one of the reasons why I considered the dependent clause translation a heretical translation, because it does deny creatio ex nihilo. It is definitely, beyond a shadow of a doubt, a mistranslation of Genesis 1:1. Genesis 1:1 should be understood as a independent clause. Bereshit should be understood as a absolute state, in the absolute state. It is a temporal phrase, and temporal phrases lack the definite article, and this is what we expect. This is also supported by like the Septuagint, and I could have brought in the what's called the Targums, which is basically the Aramaic paraphrases of Genesis, and it supports that the traditional translation. And I think the earliest it dates to is like the 3rd century AD, around the same time as our earliest manuscripts of the Septuagint dates to. And this also further supported by John 1:1, which alludes to Genesis 1:1 from the Septuagint. And you cannot translate it as a dependent clause at all from the Greek. And in the Hebrew, even then, trying to translate it to dependent clause there is awkward in the Greek grammar, or in the Hebrew grammar. In its syntax, it's very awkward and very difficult to try to make it work. You obviously have to go through lots of hermeneutical hoops. You'd have to try to get rid of Bara somehow, because it's a finite verb, and you can't put Bereshit as construct to Bara, to a finite verb. And also, there's all kinds of indicators in the actual verse to the definality of Bereshit as well. So the lack of definite article will not necessarily make it a construct noun. It's true that construct nouns don't have a definite article, but the reason that they don't have a definite article is because the absolute noun carries whether it is definite or indefinite, and and there's no absolute noun present because it's not a construct chain. Bra can't be placed in construct to Bereshit because it's a finite verb. And so the traditional translation stands, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's all I got for you today. I may, like I said, I may continue to do some more stuff from the traditional translation versus the dependent clause translation. I just wanted to go directly to the Hebrew and show you from the Hebrew why the dependent clause translation is indefensible from the grammar and syntax. You couldn't really defend that without it always sounding forced. And I do believe that the translation should be translated as in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. I think it does affirm creatio ex nihilo, and it is the first act of creation. It's not the second, it's not the third, it's the first act of creation. With that said, I would like you to like the video and subscribe to my channel. Liking it helps the YouTube algorithm. It helps get this information out there. So I would very much appreciate it. Support this channel. Like the video. Subscribe to my channel. That would be awesome. I would love to have you as a subscriber. Don't forget to drop me a comment below. Tell me what you think. You want me to do more videos like this? I probably will anyhow, but you can tell me what you think on the issue of the dependent clause versus the traditional clause. And without further ado, I guess I'll let you go. And this is Brian Bowen from Apologetics 101, telling you to stay in the know. And you have been watching Apologetics 101. Thank you.